Chapter 8, A Portrait of the Bulldog as a Young Girl. Some people are talkers and some people are writers. Zoe had always been a talker. Like all talkers, first she was a listener. She listened to her mom. She listened to her two sisters. She listened to her nanny. She listened to her dad. And even before she knew any real words, she joined every conversation, waving her hands and gurgling. Zoe's first word was da, and everyone assumed it meant dad, but really it was an all-purpose word. For a while, everything was da, or da, or da. As Zoe's vocabulary grew, she learned that talking had a purpose. It was how to give orders, how to let people know what she wanted. Zoe's first sentence was, have dat. And by the time Zoe was 3, her two older sisters knew better than to get in an argument with her. Zoe always won. She always won. Like Natalie, Zoe loved books too. Her mom and her nanny read to her all the time when she was little, but Zoe never tried to imagine herself as an author. She had no interest in that. Instead, she imagined what it would be like to talk to the authors. She wished she could pick up the phone and ask Roald Dahl how come James didn't find a giant pickle instead of a giant peach. James and the Giant Pickle. Now that would have been a really funny book. When Zoe's parents went to their first conference with her preschool teacher, there wasn't much good news. Zoe was not very good at sharing. Zoe had trouble listening to others. Zoe would not put her hand up and wait to be called on. She just talked. When the teacher began to read a book to the class, if Zoe had already heard it, she would say, I know this story, and then blurt out how it ended. And Zoe always argued. She argued about the snacks. She argued about nap time. She argued about which puppet was the best puppet. Endless arguing. The teacher said, for example, she learned the names of the primary colors all right, but she argues with us about the names of the secondary colors. Zoe insists that purple should be called grapey and orange should be called juicy. We're just trying to get her ready for school, you know, and I have to say that the staff and I have some concerns. In the cab going home, Zoe's mom was concerned too. Amy Reisman shook her head. I knew it. We've been spoiling her. I should have spent more time with Zoe. I should have taught her how to get along. But Zoe's dad said, relax. There's nothing wrong with Zoe. She's plenty smart, and once she figures out that she needs to work with other people in this world, she'll be fine. Turned out that both her parents were right. Zoe was a little spoiled and a little headstrong. But when she met Natalie Nelson in kindergarten, she learned very quickly that if she wanted to have a friend, she couldn't have her own way all the time, just most of the time. On Saturday morning, Zoe woke up at 7. First, she remembered it was Saturday. She turned over and started to go back to sleep. Then she remembered about Natalie's book. Zoe sat straight up, instantly awake. Cassandra Day was still in danger, so it would have to be Zoe to the rescue. Zoe got up, got dressed, and then did a quick cleanup of about half the mess in her room, just in case her mom decided to make an inspection tour. She was pretty sure her dad would be going to his office, and she wanted to go with him. Her dad worked late almost every night, and Sunday was usually spent with the whole family. Zoe adored her dad, and if she wanted to get some time alone with him, it had to be on Saturday. And besides, today she really needed to go to the office. Zoe's bedroom was the smallest one on the 3rd floor of her family brownstone. She closed her door silently, tiptoed past her sister's room, and headed down the stairs. At the 2nd floor landing, she smelled coffee. When Zoe opened the 1st floor door to the kitchen, her dad looked up from his newspaper, mug in one hand, and smiled at her. Hello there, Miss Earlybird. Are you my assistant this morning? Zoe beamed at him and said, I thought I was your partner, not just your assistant. Oops, my mistake. He gave Zoe a one-armed hug and a coffee-flavored kiss on the cheek. You hurry up and grab some breakfast, partner. Then we'll leave a note for your mom and hit the street. It was about 8 in the morning when Zoe and her dad left the house, so the city was still pretty quiet. They walked west to the Lexington Avenue, hailed a cab, and rode down to 46th and 3rd. Zoe didn't talk much on the cab ride or on the elevator ride up to the 47th floor. She was too busy thinking, and her dad seemed to know it. Most of the time, Zoe thought her dad was easy to be with. If she felt little like talking, she did. If she was quiet, he was too. That's what made it easy. Robert Reinsman was the senior managing partner at his office firm. The officers of Crouch, Pruitt, and Reisman were modest but well appointed. To Zoe, the place seemed huge. There was a comfortable reception area with leather couch and a pair of deep armchairs. There was a library with tall bookcases and a ladder that rolled along on a track. There was a big conference room with a long wooden table. There were smaller conference rooms and lots of offices for the associates and junior members. And there was even a spiral staircase. That went from the 47th floor down to the rest of the offices and the filing area on the 46th floor. Zoe thought her dad's office was the best. From his window, she could look down on the East River all the way to the Brooklyn Bridge. Sometimes Zoe would sit on the broad windowsill for an hour watching the boats and the helicopters and listening to her dad talk on the phone. He was a talker too, and like Zoe, he was good at winning arguments. Today her dad had a lot of emails to answer, so Zoe made herself scarce. She went to the reception area and poked through the magazines until she found what she was looking for, a recent issue of Publishers Weekly. She hadn't been lying when she told Natalie that she'd read the magazine at her dad's office, but she hadn't ever looked at it carefully. She took the issue into the main conference room, closed both doors, and sat in the big armchair at the head of the table. Spreading the magazine out on before her, she turned past 16 pages of ads before she found the table of contents. Flipping from section to section, Zoe read part of the article about horror books. Then she read about a deal to make a movie out of a children's book. There were pages and pages of ads everywhere, and a whole lot of reviews of new books. Fiction books, nonfiction books, travel books, mystery books, children's books, history books, and on and on and on. Almost an hour of reading, Zoe felt like her head was spinning. Looking in the magazine reminded her of when she looked under a big, flat rock at their farm in Connecticut last summer. She had seen thousands of little ants and bugs running every which way. There were paths and tunnels, tiny rooms and bigger rooms, with workers scurrying all over the place, carrying twigs, leaves, and eggs. A whole little world. And now she was peeking into the world of books and the people who make them. Zoe had to admit it. Publishing wasn't so simple after all. Zoe had won the argument with Natalie about trying to get her book published, and then she had won the argument about not giving up. Shaking her head, Zoe thought, but what now? Natalie's book is really good, and I want to help her, but how? Zoe walked out of the conference room, put the magazine back, and went into her dad's office. He was looking at a notebook computer on his desk, tapping away, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. Zoe flopped down on the sofa beside the tall windows. When her father paused and looked up at her, Zoe said, "Dad, if you wrote a book, how would you get it published?" He looked at me. "Me? A book? Why would I want to write a book? I'm never going to write a book." Okay, but let's say that you did write a book. How would you get it published?" Her dad pushed back from his desk and slowly swiveled his chair back and forth. He narrowed his eyes and scratched his chin. Zoe loved watching her dad think. He pursed his lips and said, "What kind of a book?" Zoe shrugged. "How should I know? My kind of a book." Her dad laughed. "All right, then. First of all, what do I always tell you? I tell you that up to a certain point, it's not what you know, but who you know. So first, I'd get a great agent, a real bulldog, the kind of agent who won't take no for an answer. Then we'd map out strategy. We'd target the best people at the best publishers. Then I just point my bulldog at the red meat, and I say, go get him. That's the who you know part. That's why you hire an agent. It's the agent's job to get the book to the right person so the book gets a fair shot. After that, the book has to stand on its own, right? Zoe nodded and said, right. So if the book's any good and it gets into the right hands, then boom, it gets published. Any questions? Zoe shook her head. Then her dad said, so what got you going on this? Oh, just curious. I found a copy of Publishers Weekly out in the reception room, and it got me thinking. Zoe knew this wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough for now. Her dad scooched his chair back and forth his desk. Well, I'll be done here in another 5 minutes or so. You ready to go? Zoe nodded. Whenever you are. Zoe was quiet on the cab ride home. She was busy thinking, and for Zoe that meant she was arguing with herself. First of all, Natalie's book is good. How come you're so sure about that? Because I am. Can you think of any books you'd read that are better? No. So like I said, the book is good. So that means if the book gets into the right editor, the editor will like it, right? Right. So all we have to do is find an agent to make sure that Cassandra Day's first novel gets looked at, right? Right. The rest of the weekend, Zoe was busy. She spent some time searching the information on the internet, and she spent some time using the computer and the printer in her mom's and dad's little office in the study on the second floor of her house. And she spent a lot of time thinking. Zoe wanted to get this book published. Sure, she loved the challenge of it. But there was more. She didn't want to do it just to prove she could get it done. It was something she wanted to do for Natalie. Something for Natalie and her mom. Because Zoe saw things when you stay friends for a long time, you see things. Zoe remembered Natalie's dad. He was not someone she would forget. Bill Nelson hadn't really been a handsome man, but he was so kind, so funny, that you thought he was so handsome too. He owned an ad agency called Nelson Creative that he had started with his brother Fred. Fred was the businessman, and Bill supplied the imagination. Natalie's dad had loved writing ads, especially funny ones. His first big campaign was some TV ads for the Brennan Furniture Company. The first ad showed a couch lying in a huge bed. And the couch was having a dream. And the couch dreamed it had wings. And the couch flew up into the sky with a dozen other couches flying in a V like geese. And then a jet flew by. And the camera followed the jet. And inside the jet, instead of an airplane seats, there were rows of Brennan couches with people looking very comfortable. And the punchline was, stop dreaming, fly, Brennan. The ads were a big hit, and Brennan couches flew out of the furniture stores all around the country. And from then on, companies lined up to hire Bill Nelson at Nelson Creative, make people feel good about their products. Of course, Zoe hadn't known all that. All she knew was how much Natalie loved her dad, and how hard it was for her to lose him. That was when they were in second grade. About 4 months after the accident, Natalie came for a sleepover at her house. And at bedtime, Zoe's dad came into her room to tuck them in. He bent over and gave Zoe a kiss goodnight, and at that moment, Zoe looked over at Natalie. Zoe never forgot the look on Natalie's face. Angry and soft and hurt and strong all at the same time. Zoe had been careful ever since not to talk about the good times she had with her dad. She didn't want to hurt her friend. And now, 4 years later, when she read Natalie's book, Zoe saw things. Not about the girl in the book, because Angela wasn't much like Natalie at all. It wasn't that part. It was when the girl's father got involved in the story. Because it was the girl's father who stood by Angela all the way through. Even when the girl got caught cheating, her dad didn't give up on her. He saw she was alone and he stepped in. The father knew that cheating had to be about something else. And when the school came down hard on Angela in the story, it was the dad who took on the headmaster and the administration. And the way he did it, by showing how the school had been cheating everyone, all the kids and all the teachers too, made Angela's dad a hero. When Natalie talked about her book, she said the story was about Angela and her friends. But Zoe knew that there was more to it. It was about a girl and her dad. The book was like a goodbye poem from Natalie to her father. That's why Zoe spent the weekend thinking and planning. Getting the book published would be good for Natalie and good for her mom, too. And by Monday morning, Zoe had her ducks all in a row.